welcome down the hobby hole. What if I add that to the intro where I'm like descending down a hole when I say it?
Yeah, it just sounds like you're falling.
No, the start of it is I'm at a tea party, like a garden party, and I'm standing next to a hole that I'm unaware of. And I'm saying, hello, everyone. And then you come over and fucking rugby tackle me into the hole. So I say, hello, everyone. Welcome to the hobby hole. And then it cuts to me falling down the hole. And I turn to the camera and I say, a weekly podcast about hobbies, interests, and hyperfixations. Sometimes our own and sometimes discovering new ones. I'm your host, Daniel Rustage, musician, dungeon master, card game designer, man of many hobbies and interests. And I am joined, as always, by my my best friend, but recently enemy, because you've just tackled me.
So I thought you were going to say recently deceased.
Recently deceased friend. Oh, God.
Recent rival.
Wait, what if one of us were to die one day? Would we still do the podcast?
Welcome down the hobby hole.
Sorry, Mark's
Today's
dead.
hobby is mourning.
Today's hobby is funerals.
Funerals.
Would you... who would I replace you with? Oh, I don't know.
Someone famous.
Someone famous. Like, what?
Yeah.
You die, and then I get on, like, someone who's so ludicrously famous. It's like, how the fuck did I get this guy on?
Ryan Gosling.
Like,
it's just like
Benedict Cumberbatch. Like,
just out of nowhere. Complete left field.
I'm here with Barack Obama.
Former President Barack Obama.
Former President Barack Obama. Hello, Daniel. My fellow American.
My hobby.
My hobby is, reading. I think he reads.
Probably.
He does.
A lot of people do.
He either reads
today's episode about?
Or he's a liar. Sorry. Because he posts, like, at the end of the year, all of his favorite books that he's...
I thought you meant, like, that's his hobby. He reads or he's
lies.
a liar. It's got to be one or the other.
He posts all his favorite books that he read that year at the end of the year on his, like, Twitter. So either he is a reader or he's just, like, a professional charlatan.
He was the former president, so...
Yeah, so... both. Today's episode...
Speaking of presidents, though, that's kind of related.
That is kind of related to today's episode. Today's episode is about kings and queens all throughout history, monarchs, people in power, that sort of thing. Me and Mark we're both very much interested in history because they're like stories, but they really happened. Pre-warning about this episode, though, neither of us are historians.
No.
And so this episode is more talking about kings and queens that we like and fun things and fun facts about them. We may get some bits wrong. We may not go into as much detail as a historian would, but it's like, for all of you, it's like a fun sort of onboarding experience. We're sharing our passion about these guys from history, and that's sort of the idea. So please don't get angry if I get anything wrong. It's very stressful.
What we're about to do now is essentially the oral tradition of many cultures, you know what I mean, where we're just passing down stories. They might not be 100% correct. I mean, but we're just telling the stories.
This podcast is inherently supposed to be like, you've met me and Mark at like a house party, and you come in. Yeah, POV.
We've cornered you in the kitchen at a house party, and we've started talking to you about kings and queens.
That's what this is, right? If you want a history podcast, there's many good ones. But this is not that. But this is still going to be fun. You know. Mark, who's your favorite king?
I think. Do you know who my favorite king is?
Is it Alfred the Great?
It is Alfred the Great. Now listen, I am not much of a patriot. Okay.
God bless.
But the stories of like the Anglo-Saxons fighting the Danes in like the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries or whatever it was, are so inspiring. It's really like the ultimate underdog story for me. And Alfred the Great is like,
he's
like
one of
the quintessential person.
He's like one of the more successful kings. I mean,
he's the only great king from England. The only one.
Here's the thing about Alfred the Great, though. Here's my controversial take about Alfred the Great.
Oh, let's hear it.
I think the only reason why Alfred the Great is, and this is true about a lot of historical figures that you'll find. The only reason why Alfred the Great is A, the Great, and B, so much is known about him, is because he's one of the only few kings from that time period that had somebody documenting the shit he was doing. Right?
Yeah.
There were people writing stories about him and probably embellishing them quite a lot.
For sure.
And I'm sure there was probably an Anglo-Saxon king, before or after him that maybe did something of note that could be comparable to Alfred. But nobody was writing shit about them.
No.
That was like, that period of English history was super like, we don't know what the fuck's going on. The Roman Empire fell, and then you had a whole bunch of English people being like, oh, what do we do? We've lost all our order.
Yeah. We don't know what a government is anymore. Yeah, we don't know how to build an
aqueduct. And the moment they started being like, okay, we've got something in place, then a fucking Vikings came over. Imagine being an English person living in, like, east of England in, I don't know, like 700 AD or earlier than that.
And like Norwich.
You've just been living your life, and all of a sudden, these ships, the size of which you've never seen in your fucking life, just land on your shore, and like not even an hour later, everybody you know is dead.
Yeah.
Just the
slight tangent. A recent thing in like recent years has been people like massively glorifying and cosplaying and talking about Vikings and trying to link themselves to Vikings and act like Vikings. And bro, the Vikings were evil. Okay. They were so evil.
Listen, I agree with you.
The actions of the Vikings were so evil.
I agree with you, but also everyone was so evil.
Yeah,
I do want to say this.
Specifically, Vikings were Nordic raiders whose only job was to travel to the next country over, kill everyone they found, and take everything from those villages.
I think it's just aesthetically people like them.
Aesthetically, it's very cool, but
here's the thing about Anglo-Saxons.
It's crazy to me.
Yes. There was a point where a lot of Anglo-Saxon kings were also very evil, fighting other Anglo-Saxons and Britons.
When it comes to like historical, like European, I'll speak on cultures, like historically those people did terrible things to each other, and the people in charge were very often not great people, and they ordered very bad things to happen.
You had to be.
Listen, Viking raids. Like, it's just an insane concept. It's just an insane concept. It's like the most vicious colonialism that like is commonly recorded.
But I imagine like Roman invasions were very similar.
Yeah, I mean you hear about a lot of
Crusades.
You know, like people, most cases of any army entering another land, there's going to be a bunch of really fucked up stories about it. You know what I mean?
It's the thing is, in those times, you had to be like a brute, but the best kings were the ones that were like brutish with a purpose, like organized brutality. The worst ones were the ones that were just either way too passive, or they were just unnecessarily brutish to the point where it like didn't make any sense anymore. You'll actually find that, especially in England, obviously I can't talk about a lot of other countries, a lot of the best kings in England were the ones that like took the power. They took the power. They weren't. A lot of the worst kings in England were the ones that just inherited it from their dad, because they didn't have the mind to be able to run a country, because the same mind that you need to be able to run a country is the same mind you need to be able to take over a country in those times.
Now, let me tell you, speaking of taking over the country, let me tell you about Alfred the Great before we move off this.
Yeah, you talk about Alfred the Great. You probably know more than me, so you tell me about it.
I have a couple history books downstairs in my bookshelf that are from the late 1700s.
Yeah.
And when I read the stories about Alfred the Great in those books, I was like, oh, this is, 320-year-old history. People, it's obviously very embellished. People were worse at telling fact from fiction and figuring out what actually happened at these historical dates. I've looked up those stories that are in those books from the 1700s now, and historians agree that they probably are all true, which I fucking love, first of all.
I'll give you an example.
Well, first of all, Alfred the Great, he was fourth in line for the throne. He never thought he would be king.
This is my point.
He was never groomed to be king. He was never groomed to rule. He never cared about ruling. He was like interested in art and literature and different shit like that, right? But because of all the rest of his fucking family died, he ended up becoming king.
Yeah.
And he became king while the Dane law was being created in England, and all the Danes were invading and taking over as much land as they could. Fucking people were dying left and right. His kingdom was becoming smaller and smaller and less unified. But he got pushed back to the point of like the only castle, the only holding that Alfred still has was just some fucking like castle in a swamp somewhere in the west of England.
Yeah.
And he purposely chose this stronghold because it was hidden away. It wasn't near any main settlements. Nobody knew about it really. So the Danes didn't find him. And he was like building his strength there. And what he did this is my favorite story of Alfred the Great, is he disguised himself as a bard, a traveling bard, went into a Danish camp, played the music, and talked to them in Danish because he learned the language, learned where their troops were and where they were moving, and then went back to his castle, told his like most loyal men. They organized small armies and just like guerrilla warfare attacked all the points.
That's incredible.
And that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's like Game of Thrones. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's incredible. This is what I'm saying. That's what it's like. True thing. These are like fun stories, but they really happened.
It's incredible.
Great. Big ups, Alfred the Great.
Big ups, Alfred the Great.
I guess this is both your favorite king and also probably your favorite British monarch.
Yes.
That's if you count.
Honest, I don't know a lot about other British monarchs.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is if you count Alfred the Great as an English monarch, which a lot of people don't. They just say he's the king of the Anglo-Saxons. There's my web camera.
He was the king of Wessex, which is arguably the first. He kind of like unified a lot of what was left and pushed out as much of the Danish as he could, and kind of later formed England.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a proto-England.
Proto-England, right? Anglo-Saxon, like Anglo-Saxon England. I mean, sort of I think the modern interpretation, I could be wrong, is that England really is the combination of Anglo-Saxon culture and French culture. It's why a lot of people consider William the Conqueror to be the first English king, because William the Conqueror is at least the first English king that all the monarchs after them, when monarchs say like Henry II, Henry III, like that's where the naming convention starts. Before we go to them, though, I do want to say that Ethelred the Unready, which I think is pre-William the Conqueror, is very funny because not only was he a shit king, and his little painting is really bad, but his name is Ethelred the Unready, which is a funny name in modern translation, but back then, Ethelred meant well-read. Or it was something like...
It was like well-prepared.
Yeah, well-prepared, and unready meant like... No, this is what it... Sorry, completely wrong. Ready just meant informed, right? Ethelred meant well-informed, and unready was misinformed. So he was well-informed and misinformed, or something to that effect, and I think it was really funny. Like, the wordplay on his name was really good. So it's either well-prepared, the ill-prepared, or well-informed, the ill-performed, but it's also incredible.
Really... Sorry, Alfred's like family line is really funny because you look at it and it's all Ethelwulf, Ethelred, Adred, all these like classic Anglo-Saxon names, and he's just Alfred.
Yeah.
Which has come to be just such a normal English name compared to, like, none of the other Anglo-Saxon names have survived, but Alfred has. So it just sounds so funny when you look back at his family tree, and they all sound like characters from Beowulf, and then he's just some guy at the club.
Gosh, this is going to become, you know what, fuck it, we're English kings and queens, this is how we're going to start it. William the Conqueror obviously comes over, and I think, kind of controversial figure, at the time, very much. You know the story of 1066. I think a lot of our audience are not British, so they won't know the story of 1066. So if you permit me to do a little recap, like Sparks notes on the story of 1066, right? POV.
Yeah.
You are Harold. You are Harold. You're a guy called Harold. The king of Anglo-Saxon, he has just died, and on his deathbed, he has told you that you are going to be the next king. Because, to be honest, it makes sense. You own most of the land anyway. You're going to be the next king. You're essentially like vice president. You're going to be the president. So he dies. You become king. Then it turns out that before the old king died, like years ago when he took a trip to Normandy, he had promised some other guy that he would be king. And that guy is now pissed that you're king. And he's going to come over and invade. And you've heard this. You've heard this through the grapevine. You're like, oh, fuck, let me prepare because this Norman guy, William, is going to come over and attack. So you do a really good job of getting all your units and you all line them up on the southern coast of England to be like, I'm ready. I am prepared for this guy to come over. He's going to get fucked up by my Anglo-Saxon guys. And then you wait there for months and months and months, and he never comes. He honestly, you start losing people to starvation, right? People get bored. Some people go home, and you're sort of like, when's he going to come? And then, all of a sudden, a messenger comes from the north. Sir, King, the Norwegians are coming. And they're attacking from the north. Harold Hardrada somehow thinks he has a claim to the throne as well, so he's coming down and attacking from the north. So you're like, fuck. So you get all of your troops, you bring them up to the north, and you win. You beat the Norwegians. Incredible achievement. But as you are about to defeat the Norwegians, another messenger comes up and he says, King William, he's come from Normandy and he's come to attack
William
you from the
has
south.
arrived.
He's arrived, and you're like, oh fuck. And so you take your remaining army and you bring them all the way back down to the south coast. And once you arrive there, luck be have it, William, he's not as prepared as you thought you'd be. Your army is roughly the same size as his. And you don't need to win this battle. You just need to not lose. So you put all your troops on a big mountain, on a big hill, and you've got these great archers, and they fire down at the Normans, William's troops, and you're winning. All you've got to do is not leave that hill, and you've won. There's no way that William can go up that hill without dying. The Normans, they have a little bit of they're a bit disorganized. They're like, oh, and there's a rumor that spreads around the camp that William has died. So a lot of them start to retreat because they don't know what to do. And your men on top of that hill see the Normans retreating and against your orders start to charge towards them. They go down the hill, they start charging at them, and as they're charging the Normans fucking flank your guys and kill like a whole big chunk of your army. And you're like, what the fuck? I told you not to do this. And then the battle seems to just continue like that, where the Normans are like, actually, this is quite a good strategy. And they just keep fake retreating, and you guys keep falling for it, until eventually you are shot in the eye and die, and William conquers all of England. And that is why we call cow meat beef. Which is another fun fact for anyone who doesn't know. The reason why the English language has a different word for the meat of an animal than the actual animal, where cow, beef, pork, pig. Like if you in Korea, like the translation of pork is just pig meat, but the reason we have a different word for it is because beef and pork come from the French root, because they were the ones that were eating it, whilst pig and cow came from the Anglo-Saxon because they were the ones farming it. Because you had a period of time where all of the nobility were French, but all of the commoners were Anglo-Saxon. And there you go. There's your brief history.
Like the language of the court was like French.
Yeah.
While we were still speaking Anglo-Saxon, early English. William the Conqueror. What a story.
What a story. Sorry.
What would England be like if he was repelled? Eh?
It's interesting, right? Like, I think if William the Conqueror, I think the future of England would have been a lot more Nordic if William the Conqueror never took over.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of almost a natural progression was that Danish-English culture mix that probably would have persisted. But I think once William the Conqueror took over, he brought castles with him. We didn't have castles before William the Conqueror, and the Vikings couldn't handle castles. So that put a stop to that, pretty much. And then we had lots of kings from that point onwards. The thing is, most kings are really sheltered from birth and also, like, ill-equipped in the brain because they're the product of incest. So a lot of them were crazy. And you had that a lot with English monarchs. I'd say like a good 50% at least English monarchs were just fucked up. A lot of them were crazy. You had like Henry II, who was so he had a friend called Thomas Becket, who he would do things. He would like to play little fun practical jokes where they were riding through their town and there was like a homeless man, and Henry II, his friend Thomas Becket was like, oh, this man looks really cold. We should do something to help. And Henry II's like, well, if he's so cold, why don't you give him your clothes? And Thomas Becket's like, ha ha ha, very funny. And then Henry's like, no, I'm being serious. And starts stripping the clothes of Thomas Becket to give to the old man. And Thomas Becket's like, ha ha ha, very funny. And then Henry, a lot of English kings they butt heads with the Catholic Church because the Pope is always like, wants to choose who the bishops are, but the king is like, why are you deciding the things I do in my own country? So when the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think it was, died in England and was able to be replaced, Henry II put his best friend Thomas Becket in power, thinking like, this guy's my best friend, he does everything I say. The moment that Thomas Becket got some sort of power, he was like, I actually fucking hate that guy, and just did everything he possibly could to spite Henry II, to the point that Henry II, who had this terrible temper, just one day was like, I'm so annoyed, who will rid me of this fucking guy? And a bunch of random like soldiers were like, ooh, it sounds like the king doesn't want this guy to be around, so they go to Thomas Becket and just fucking kill him. And then not only Henry II's like, oh no, I was joking, and JK, I mentioned Minecraft. And not only that, but it's also like, it's a huge thing to, like, a king is not allowed to assassinate the Archbishop of Canterbury, so he had to issue like a public apology and be like, this was not my fault. And I think he got those soldiers executed. And being that soldier POV, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get like so much money from this, and it's like, what do you mean I'm gonna be killed? I did you a favor.
You asked for this.
Yeah,
I have read about that story. It's really
it's very good. And then you obviously have Henry VIII, who wanted to have so many divorces that he completely changed the religion in England. He just like completely separated the church and state. But I also realize I've been yapping for like 20 minutes, so you could take the reins here.
Let's move away from England.
Let's move away from England. Let's go somewhere else.
Let's talk about Africa. Because there was two leaders that I was really interested in recently, and I had a look in. We'll start in Mali.
Okay.
Mansa Musa.
He's the big one. The richest man of all time.
Richest man.
I think he's still of all time
in all history. Yeah.
But just like for relative wealth, right? Like percentage of wealth he controlled in the world. Richest man of all time.
I was reading about his Hajj, his like trip to Mecca, because he was Muslim, and there wasn't, I don't think, a lot of Muslims in that area, sort of West Sub-Saharan Africa, like Mali, Nigeria, Ghana, that kind of area. I don't think was very Muslim population. That was more like Iberia and obviously the East Mediterranean. But he was trying to establish more Islam in his kingdom in that area. And by the way, he succeeded, because that area is like 95% Muslim now.
Yeah, of course he would.
He did his trip to Mecca, and
I love this.
Most of what we know about him was written after that trip to Mecca. Like almost no written history and oral history within Mali was actually spoken about him until he did his trip to Mecca, and then everyone started writing about him. Yeah. Because on the way, he took like hundreds of slaves and camels just carrying big bars of gold and bags of gold dust. Like, when I read that he spread wealth as he traveled to Mecca, I was like, oh, okay, he gave to the poor, he invested in things, he built things. No, he literally just took like big bars of gold, big bags full of gold dust, and just give it to homeless people and just threw it on the street.
I mean, that's the thing. He gave so much money to the poor that he single-handedly crashed the Arabian economy.
Yeah,
just him.
He decimated the cost of gold in Egypt specifically because he gave out so much of it in Cairo. Really
I think it's
funny.
Incredible to have that sort of wealth.
I love that. But then he like expanded the Empire of Mali a little bit, added some new cities, including Timbuktu, which Timbuktu is an incredible city because not only is its name just shorthand for something made up far away in England, like if you're in England and someone says Timbuktu, people assume that isn't a real place.
Yeah, it's different.
It just means
it's different in different countries. I think I watched a video about that where depending on where you're from.
It's the same with like the phrase "it's all Greek to me."
Yeah, it's like to some people it's like it's all Chinese to me, or it's all etc. But
Timbuktu. He wanted to make that like the center of like culture and knowledge for like the Islamic world. So he invested a bunch in it. Have you seen the buildings in Timbuktu?
I think so.
They are crazy looking. From what I'm reading, like the mosques and stuff that he built are the same now as they were when he invested and built in them. And
that's amazing.
And all that construction. And they just look they look like something from the ancient world, obviously.
Yeah.
But like they've just been kept the exact same for that entire.
Yeah, they're incredible.
However long it's been. So they're crazy looking. If you haven't seen the buildings in Timbuktu, look them up. Because genuinely it looks like something from the Elder Scrolls. Yeah, that's amazing. He's great. And then the other African leader I was reading about is Shaka Zulu.
Good old Shaka Zulu.
Who, very controversial.
Oh, is he?
Yes. I started looking at the Zulus because I was interested in like the Zulu-English conflict.
Yes.
Like famous conflict where the English came to Zululand in South Africa to fight these guys, and they had their rifles and cannons and all that kind of, Imperial British stuff. And the Zulus just have cow hide shields. They're almost naked and they have spears, but they somehow like hold their own.
Yeah, he's sort of well known for just having that amazing battle prowess to be able to fight against guns with spears.
Yeah. So I was looking up Shaka because I was like, oh, he must be, famous, super famous warrior, crazy guy. People must love him. Bro, he decimated South Africa.
Oh, I can imagine.
He was like apparently a psycho, and he just like went on like these crazy rampages of just like killing a bunch of like tribes that he didn't like. And he is, some sources claim that he is the reason that the Dutch were able to get such a strong foothold in South Africa, because he killed so many of his like fellow like countrymen that the Dutch didn't really have anyone to fight when they got there. So they were just like, we can just settle and take over this because there's no one left to fight us.
Yeah. Well, I also knew
is crazy.
He invented quite a lot of different types of weaponry. Like, he invented
when
a
it
kind
comes
of short
to
spear.
pure warfare,
like
he was like incredible warrior. Like he had like a bunch of the weaponry that he invented, the tactics that he kind of came up with were crazy. But I find this a lot where if you research someone who is like a legendary warrior or a warrior leader, like you hear about those kind of accolades and you're like, that's really cool, I'm going to look further into them. Then everything they do sounds crazy and it's just like swathes of death. And you're like, God.
Yes, like how could you even handle that? I mean, oh gosh, and a lot of history as well. It's really, if you go back far enough, there's just areas where we don't actually know for sure because we just take what those people say at face value. Yeah. Right. And I think
history is written by the victors.
If we're talking about Africa, I could move to the Middle East to talk about one of my favorite like mysteries in history. Which is the story about the rise of Darius the Great in Persia, if you know him.
I do not.
So Darius the Great, he's a great king of Persia. Again, Persia was this amazing empire. At the time, it was the biggest in the world. It was like pre-Roman, incredible big empire, took over the Assyrians. But the thing about Darius the Great was, the story goes, is that the king before Darius, Cambyses II, in those times, there was always a lot of threat from like your brothers and sisters taking over the throne and stuff. So in secret, Cambyses II killed his brother. But like he didn't make it a public thing because, it's still like murder and people don't want that. And his brother was quite popular. So he just killed his brother in secret, and his like close confidants, including Darius, knew about it, like the close royal guards and stuff. Then Cambyses dies, and I think without an heir. And all of a sudden, there's this guy that pops up claiming to be Cambyses' brother, who says, well, now I'm the next king because my brother died. And Darius is like, wait a fucking second. Cambyses killed his brother, but it was in secret. So the audience doesn't know about this. The Persians don't know about this. So this guy is pretending to be the next king. This is a magician, a faker. So Darius gets up a bunch of his guys, and they go and find Cambyses' alleged brother, and they kill him, and then Darius proclaims himself king. Right. Which is incredible. But the thing is, we only have Darius's word.
Oh, okay.
So that could have actually been his brother. You know what I mean? That could have been his brother. And we have no way of knowing. Because it's totally plausible for Cambyses to have killed his brother, because that's the thing that lots of Persian rulers do. But it's also totally plausible that he didn't, because Darius, we only have his point of view. And it does sound like something somebody would make up. This guy's not his brother. He secretly killed his brother.
Yeah, and he only told me.
He only told me about it. Like, so it's... I think that's incredible. Like, and no, historians just aren't able to... I think, from my knowledge, are able to know the actual truth of that. And I think some believe one way, some believe the other.
I mean, there's a lot that I've read about where it's like, this is the claim. We have no way to verify it. Like, it's either from cultures where they didn't write things down, or where written stuff has been lost. So it's just like, just what we've been told. One of those is actually with New Zealand, Aotearoa, the Maori.
Ooh. Oh, let's go.
King Kupe, the famous navigator and king of the Polynesian sort of, I wouldn't call it a kingdom so much, but those islands. They all spread out. They went to Hawaii. They went to New Zealand, and allegedly King Kupe in like 930 sailed from Hawaii to New Zealand, Aotearoa, and he saw it and he named it the Land of the Long White Cloud because that's what it looked like to him. And he settled there and he founded, Maori, the people, their kingdom that came from there. Except, depending on which source you read, he made that voyage anywhere between 930 and 1400.
This is like, man,
it's a massive discrepancy. We don't know when this guy made the famous voyage, when he was born, or if he even existed.
Yep.
But he's essentially like a mythological figure now in sort of Maori culture.
It's almost like it's like Arthur, King Arthur.
It's like a King Arthur type thing. But
it's like King Arthur didn't exist, but loads of people in those times did, and most of the King Arthur stories are just like fan fiction written about him later down the line. And
I think if you were a peasant born in sort of like the 1500s, you'd probably believe that King Arthur existed.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
King Kupe, really fun.
I want to put this on record. Do you know what? We're probably actually going to have to do more than one Kings and Queens episode now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
Because I'm realizing that we're barely making a dent into our notes, and it's already been like almost 40 minutes. And
oh my god, we get so carried away.
But that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm happy with that. I think we might do like a part 2 or a part 3 of Kings and Queens. Or like more specific ones.
I would love. Yeah, we can go for a little bit longer and then we'll cut it off. But I would love if people are watching this on YouTube or wherever, if they see the Twitter. I don't know where people can message you about this.
I don't know, comments.
I would love for people to comment a nation, a country, some sort of civilization from history that we haven't mentioned that would be fun to look into for the leader. Because I have a few. I have like Central America, Japan.
I want to put my Cleopatra pet peeve on record though. Just so I have a Cleopatra pet peeve, and that's because I think ancient Egypt, the Egyptian Empire, has so many, incredible kings and queens, pharaohs throughout history, but so many modern media, like Civilization is a really good example of this, where they use Cleopatra as a representation of a pharaoh of Egypt. But Cleopatra is not Egyptian. She's Greek, and she was just placed as the pharaoh of Egypt by the Romans to she's like a puppet leader of Egypt. She's the equivalent, in my opinion, not a historian, but she's the equivalent of, like if Civilization were to have India as a playable country, and then the leader of it was the guy that was in control of India after England during the British Raj. It's the equivalent of that.
Yeah,
and everyone's like, oh, Cleopatra, the famous Egyptian. It's like, she's Greek. And
yeah,
she didn't even speak.
There's so many incredible like Egyptian pharaohs, and there's like the Egyptian, like Egypt as like a kingdom with pharaohs and stuff existed for so long. I mean, like thousands and thousands of years of history.
Thousands of years. And here's the thing. I think for games like Civ, the reason why they do it is because they want a balance of like, they want to have a balance, and they want to have like a certain amount of women leaders as well. And that's like a clear one you'd include. Yeah. But there's so many female pharaohs. There's Hespert, there's Nefertiti, there's so many that are iconic and are actually Egyptian. Saying Cleopatra, it's like the equivalent as well as someone like Alexander the Great, because he technically was pharaoh of Egypt at one point, but it's like he's not Egyptian. And I might get hate for that. But the thing is, we just know a lot about Cleopatra because the Romans documented it, and she had the thing with Mark Antony and all that. And the thing about the Romans, and part of the reason why they're so popular, as well as their like branching empire, is it was starting from the Romans that we started actually documenting stuff, because most of the empires pre-Roman didn't have a lot of record keeping. Like, we only know about the Persians because of the Greeks and the Babylonians. So like East Persia, we don't know that much about. And there are so many ancient empires that we only know like dates, but no stories. But the Romans, they were people in Roman civilization that were actively writing. And there are some Roman people that are more famous now because they were writing and documenting stuff. I think there's a senator who his name is more well known, and he has, so much more information about him, even though he's only just as popular as the other 300 senators, because he had a diary and he was keeping track of like Julius Caesar's uprising in the Senate and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I say that, I can't remember his name, but but the thing about the Roman Empire is, I think it's something small, like only like 10% of their emperors were competent. Right?
Yeah.
Like they have, there's like a handful: Trajan, Hadrian, Augustus. But like, there's so many fucking whack jobs. Like, do you know about like Caligula, where
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Caligula went to war with Poseidon. So he ordered his men to throw spears into the sea. Yeah. And then you had Nero that watched Rome burn.
Who is like there's a I nearly said character, I guess, a character from history. There's a king, historical king, who's kind of like the antipode of Caligula, where he went to war with the sea to prove that he was mortal, because he took his army to the ocean and ordered the tide not to come in. And then when it came in, he turned to his men and said, See, I'm not a god. I'm just a human.
So he did like the opposite.
Yeah. It's like
I've heard that. I've 100% heard that. I don't know who.
I read that recently, and I can't remember.
Because he just wants people to
did that.
I don't know. Gosh. Oh, we're not historians.
We're not historians,
people
guys.
Passionate about history.
So passionate. Love it.
I just want to take a brief Frederick the Great detour.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you much about his life, because he fought in the 7 Years' War. He was just a cool guy. He loved classical music. King of Prussia. Did quite a lot. Quite famous for being quite a small country, that he managed to take quite a small country to make it quite powerful. But what I like about Frederick the Great specifically is I really like his quotes, because a lot of great rulers have these like really profound quotes. But his quotes are stuff like, "The more I see of men, the better I like my dog." If soldiers were to begin to think, not one of them would remain in the army. One of my favorites is, "A crown is merely a hat that lets the rain in."
Brilliant.
And then one where he goes, "A German singer? I should as soon expect to get pleasure from the neighing of my horse."
Insane.
Which I really like it.
I love that.
I really like it. That's why welcome to the Frederick the Great quote corner.
Yeah. Wow.
Go ahead, tell me about one of your kings, because I just told you about 3 of mine.
I don't want to ramble too long. There's speaking of Egyptians, there is Ramses II.
Yeah, Ramses II, iconic.
Who is like super famous, super iconic, one of the classics. I know almost nothing about Ramses II except for a poem that was written about him by Shelley. Yeah. Which I love, which is like this is very loosely related to the ideas of kings and queens. But I'm gonna quote this poem anyway, because I love this. It's a poem called Ozymandias. Ozymandias being one of the names of Ramses II. The poem is about a traveler in the desert finding the remains of a statue of Ramses II. It's just the legs. The legs on a plinth, and a plaque is there. Yeah. And on the plaque it says, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And then the traveler looks around, and it's just a desert. There's nothing there except for the legs of this ruler. And I fucking love that poem.
That's so good.
I absolutely love that.
I love that.
So hard.
It's just such a good representation of no matter how powerful you are, no matter how important you think you are, the passage of time will always humble you.
It's so crazy when you look back at some ancient civilizations and there's just nothing left.
Absolutely
there are so many times in history where really powerful civilizations disappear.
Completely
disappear. There's like the Indus River Valley civilization.
Yeah.
Nothing left of that. There's like the Nubians, I think.
Yeah.
It was like modern day Ethiopia, kind of just vanished. God, it just happens over and over again in history, where like a civilization gets really powerful, really influential, and then either like decline super fast or just straight up vanish. Like, how does this keep happening?
Can I talk about one of my favorite kings of history?
Yes.
Which is, I think if you were to say which one's my favorite, I would say King Sejong the Great of Korea. I did take some notes for Sejong.
Yeah.
Sejong King the Great. Sejong the Great. Iconic king. He did quite a lot for Korean people. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that he's most famous for is that at the time, everyone was writing in like really like complicated kanji, characters, and like the language
Chinese.
was
They were writing in
Chinese.
Chinese.
Yeah, they were like in Chinese.
Yeah.
Complicated. So you have to be a nobleman who like took a formal education to even read and write. And King Sejong.
Plus also the Chinese like letters weren't created obviously for the Korean language, so they were trying to apply the sounds of their language to Chinese, and it wasn't like
wasn't working. And I feel like this is really iconic for Sejong. It's like a lot of kings are quite self-absorbed, and what Sejong did was he invented an entire language so that the common people in his empire were able to read and write, which is just like, so often kings do not do that sort of thing for them. They do stuff just for like their noble people, right? Yeah. And he invented the language Hangul, which is what the Koreans still read and write and speak in to this day. And it's an incredible, it's such a good language. And it really, a lot of language written has come about sort of naturally through time, but you can tell that Hangul is a language that was like designed by somebody. Yeah. And it's one of those languages that I think they say that any word can be written in Hangul. Anyway, it's similar to like the pronunciation, the phonetic alphabet in that way, where and it's really simple. You just have like a bunch of consonants, a bunch of vowels, you mash them together, and you make words. It's great. It's absolutely great. And that's like his major thing. But he also just like invented a whole. I went to Korea and I went to this museum, the Sejong Museum.
I think we've both been to the Sejong Museum.
And what's incredible
Seoul, right?
about this museum is that it will have like things that Sejong invented, and then underneath it will have the equivalent thing and when it was invented in Europe. It'll be like Sejong invented this, and 300 years later they invented it in Europe. Like Sejong was first. I don't know how much of it is true, but it is pretty impressive that he at least has enough of them for them to fill up an entire wall of it.
It's one of those things where I don't know how much of the inventions are his directly, but he was obsessed with like science and
reading.
And, like,
I mean,
kind of thing.
When he invented the language of Hangul, he like completely wrote one of like the longest Chinese texts. It's like this big story. He like rewrote it entirely in Hangul to prove that the language worked himself. He just did that himself. And that text is still visible in that Sejong Museum, the original text. You could see it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Didn't Sejong go like mostly blind from being up like late at night by like, candlelight writing?
Yeah, in like dark rooms, like,
probably.
He just,
strained his eyes really. Yeah. I think that's when I was in the Sejong Museum, I think that was one of the things. He went like almost entirely blind because he was just up at night working by candlelight on Hangul and different scientific stuff. But also, Sejong created this. It was called the Hall of the Worthies, where he basically invited all of the greatest scientific minds from Korea purely to like and paid them purely just to try and invent new things for the Korean people. And it's like genuinely like that's the kind of thing you might hear about like nowadays, like in like the last 150 years.
I want to say this is 1400s. He lived in the 1400s.
Yeah, this is like 600 years ago. It's crazy. Also, now I find this hilarious. So he obviously at that time in Korea they had like a slave class, right? They had like their lowest class was like a slave class that was conscripted to work for the nobility. Sejong, when he was ruling, implemented a new law that meant that slaves got 100 days of maternity.
Oh, wow.
And 30 days of paternity, which is more than Americans get now.
And they're not slaves, like.
Not slaves.
Wow.
It's just crazy that Sejong give more maternity and paternity on average than Americans. I mean, Americans don't get paid paternity, usually. It's
That's
just
amazing.
It's insane. But yeah, like for the time, he was not only like scientifically very like forward thinking, but like just kind of progressive for his contemporaries.
Yeah.
Like he had slaves, so he wasn't actually progressive, but for the fucking 1400s,
I mean, a lot of them you have to put them in context of the time, right?
Yeah, he was a radical
it's
liberal.
Like a lot of English kings killed people, but like they had to, right? So that
it's the context of the times. But I love Sejong.
Yeah, he's amazing. Big ups. Big up Sejong.
Big up Sejong the Great.
Big up Sejong the Great.
Did you know his real name, like his personal name, was not Sejong?
I think I must have known that. Was it like it's something really simple, right? Like Yi, right?
It's Ido.
Ido.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I just find that interesting. I don't know if that's like a thing that Korean kings
What's
did.
a thing
like,
that
they always
English
just take
kings do sometimes?
Yeah, I have heard that.
A lot of English kings, when they ascend to the throne, they change their name to the name of a previous king.
Pope does it?
It's iconic for popes. I think almost every pope, when they become pope, they change their name, which I think is amazing. Pope Innocent. I hope we get another Pope Innocent. I said I big up Pope Innocent.
Yeah.
You know what?
All right.
We should wrap up.
I was going to say, should we
should wrap up and then save the rest of our kings and queens for next time.
I have several more, but
I also do, but I feel like we'll go on forever. You know,
let's do another episode. Let us know what you thought of this one, and if there's any regions of the world we haven't talked about, because
we barely
there's
talked
an
about
infinite
any
amount of fucking kings and queens.
Yeah,
so,
and then my camera goes again. I'm not even going to turn it back on.
We've talked about like 5 regions, so give us some more, and I think that'll do us for now.
That'll be do. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming down the Hobby Hole. Should we read another review, just really quickly?
Yeah.
Hobby Hole review.
And since Rustage's camera is off while he reads this, I'll lip sync.
Yes. It's okay. It's a podcast. It's a podcast.
This is just for the video listeners. Since his camera's gone off and they're confused right now and they're wondering why they can hear 2 voices but they can only see one person. I'll lip sync your vocals.
We've got over 200 5-star reviews on Spotify, so I wanted to say thank you for that.
Wow,
which is awesome.
That's incredible. Thank you guys so much.
And let's see these reviews. I don't know if Spotify has a place where you can leave reviews. So these reviews are just coming from Apple Podcasts. Down the Hobby Hole. This is it always sends me to the Danish version of the website for some reason. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read this one. Someone said, Ellie Hardy says, it's very nice. As a 13-year-old nerdy dork, I'm sure they'll enjoy listening to Daniel and Mark's thoughts and all sorts of hobbies, whether I partake in the hobby or not. I was walking my dog when I started listening to the first episode, and I kept making the walk longer than it had to be just so I could keep listening to these two talk about D&D and nerdcore. I'm looking forward to all the future episodes. Well, thank you, Ellie. We appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, gosh, we got to scream. That's how we end our episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to scream in
Rustage,
harmony?
It's so dark in your room. Are you scared of the dark?
No, actually. I'm actually really good in the dark, yeah. Sorry. But you know what I am scared of? What? Sorry.
What were you about to say?
You just don't know what's going to come out of my mouth.
Yeah, it could be anything.
I am scared of what's with me right now. Please don't hurt me.